I like to try to change your preconceived notion of what you think stained glass is, right? Everyone has kind of an idea of what, when you say stained glass, something comes to your mind. Usually it's, maybe you grew up in a church where you looked at the windows during the pastor's sermon, or you had an aunt or a grandfather or your mother did stained glass in the garage, something like that. Anyway, there's generally some association you make with stained glass that I hope to kind of change your idea of what that might be. And sorry, I'm going to switch here to my control. So this is probably what you think of. So this is a window done by Tim Carey, who was our creative designer for a number of years at Judson. And this window was designed in 2010. And this is, a pretty conventional window, traditional window that Judson's kind of known for. And it's a beautiful window. But I like to contrast it with this window, which was made in Germany in the same year by an American artist. His name's Scott Parsons, and he does amazing work. But to me, I've kind of always been looking at what was going on in Germany, because the Germans did a very different, kind of took a very different direction after World War II in terms of design and stained glass and the development. And they were kind of reconstructing after the war, and they went a very contemporary route. And so if you look at that piece, there's no lead work, right, that you see on the right-hand side. There's a lot of what we call acid work. So the Germans are very good at working with flash glass. And flash glass is, for example, if you look at the lamp on the window on the left, there's a layer of red on top of clear, very thin layer of red on top of clear in one piece of glass. And if you put a resist on there and you expose the red to acid, or maybe you sandblast it off, you get the clear that remains. So you get these amazing transitions of color from red and clear, or blue on clear. There's a lot of combinations of flash glass. With that, the Germans are very good at working with enamels. So enamels are painted glass that you can paint on the surface of the glass. So it looks, you can get some really good blending and transitions, combining it with flash glass to create these really contemporary modern effects. So, so I show you this contrast because for me, it kind of explained a lot of the decision-making that I was making when I really started getting involved in the studio, and kind of what I was looking at, what influenced me when I made decisions. So, because for me, it was hard to be objective, right? I grew up in a stained glass studio. I did have a choice. My parents gave me a choice. I didn't have to be a stained glass artisan, but it starts with this man. So this man is my great-grandfather. His name is William Lees Judson, and he was from England. And we attribute the founding of the studio to him. He came to the United States in the 1852. He was 10 years old, and then he shortly moved to Canada with his family, and then ended up in the Civil War. He was in Illinois in the 1860-61, and joined the North. The side of the North was actually in the brigade with Grant, Ulysses Grant. He marched with Grant down to Tennessee until Grant got called up to Washington. And then he moved back to Canada. He ended up in Chicago in 1890 preparing for the World's Fair. So the World's Fair in '93 was a huge, massive kind of endeavor that really changed Chicago and still influences Chicago today. He was involved with that, the arts building. And then in '93 was told basically by his doctor to go find a nice warm place to live out his remaining days. His days were numbered. And so, so he found a friend of his, George Wharton James, who said, the place you want to go is Pasadena. And so that's where he headed. Judson was a plein air painter, so he was painting, this is the Arroyo Seco. So for those of you familiar with the area, this is the Hawley Street Bridge. I think that's probably an old bridge, but if you go over that hill on the right, you'd probably today see the Rose Bowl. And so this is north looking in the Arroyo, and the Arroyo Seco attracted a number of artists like William Lees Judson. And William Lees couldn't afford to live in Pasadena, but he found this great house you see on the left-hand side there. The overlooking the arroyo. So this is kind of a great picture for tonight's audience, because if you're looking north, you see the kind of the hill in the front, and then the San Gabriel Mountains in the back. So those are a little softer. Those are San Gabriel. So if you go up to the foothills, you turn left, you're in Glendale. If you turn right, you're in Pasadena. This is kind of looking northwest. And that bridge that you saw there crossing the arroyo is the red car. So the red car ran from Pasadena to downtown Los Angeles, and I think it went all the way down to Long Beach, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody probably knows that. So this house where he got was great, because he could hop on the red car and get up to Pasadena or downtown Los Angeles, wherever he wanted to go. And you see the train line, the second bridge in the back there. That's, I think, the rail line that was for longer distances. But this is a great shot. So this is looking towards Pasadena. So you're kind of looking east-northeast. And you're basically standing in the spot of Judson's house and also this building. So this is the original School of Fine Arts for USC. And Judson was responsible for building this building and was the first dean of the School of Fine Arts. And so he kind of foot the bill because he had experience teaching at the university level in Canada. And he was also a Methodist. So the USC at that time was the Fighting Methodist. So he was a good candidate to start that, a very good organizer. Judson also started what was called the Arroyo Guild of Fellow Crafters. So the We Can logo that I told you was in the terracotta above the front door. You see it there. And the Arroyo Craftsman was kind of the answer to Stickley's The Craftsman magazine coming out of New York. And unfortunately, they were better craftsmen than they were publishers, because this is volume 1, number 1, and it's the last publication. So this is an endeavor they didn't quite get off the ground, but it's a very interesting publication with some kind of insightful articles that are still kind of funny to read today, very kind of Victorian almost. The building that I just showed you burnt down in 1910 and was rebuilt in 1911. And so when we first walked into the video, this is what you were seeing. And so this is the school. This would have been rebuilt for the School of Fine Arts, which remained there until 1920, like I mentioned. And this building's very hard to describe architecturally. It's a little Victorian. It's a little craftsman-y. The shingles went on it. It's got the arroyo stone at the bottom. And but it still serves our purposes today, and it's a great place to work. Here's an early school photograph of the School of Fine Arts students, which is interesting, mostly women. So at that time, apparently fine arts was something acceptable that a lot of women could study at the university level. And so there was quite a few women, and so it's kind of exciting. I love all the hats and everything in that shot. It's a fun shot to show. But really what I want to talk to you about tonight is Judson Studios. And so Judson Studios was founded by William Lee's 3 sons, although we attribute it to William Lee's because he got his son started in stained glass and did some of their early designs. And so here they are sitting in front of the old building before it burnt down. So it's pre-1910. And that's my great-grandfather there with that amazing mustache. And his brother Paul sitting in the front and Lionel in the back. And so really these 3 brothers, they come out in 1895. Judson had found a glazer that would hire them, and so they worked for another glazer, and then in 1897 started their own company. And their own company was called originally the Colonial Art Glass Company. And one of their first commissions was this building, which is the Phineas Mansion. So if you're familiar with the Pasadena Historical Museum, or Museum of History, sorry, this was Phineas. They're in the Phineas's second mansion. This is Phineas's first mansion, which was on Orange Grove Boulevard, believe it or not. If you can imagine this building in 1897 on Orange Grove Boulevard, it feels like you're in Morocco, but this building burnt down eventually. But Pasadena Museum of History came to me while I was researching the book, luckily, and had these photos. And so this is the earliest window that we have on record for the Judsons have made. And you see the dome at the top of this kind of open space in the center of the house. I think that's a stuffed peacock. I don't think that's a real peacock. And here's looking up at the dome. So we were, it was amazing that Plessy inherited, and I thank them so much for sharing these with us. And they have all the correspondence with the architect and Mrs. Phineas and the Judsons about making this amazing kind of Islamic designed window, which is fantastic. Other early work, obviously the arts and crafts movement. This is at the Abbey San Encino. So some of you are familiar with the Abbey, which is a neighbor of Judson Studios. And it was run by a printer, a guy named Clyde Brown. And you see his initials there in the bottom right, the CB. And this window still exists, and was, story goes is that this was done in exchange for some printing promotional material for Judson Studios. And so they bartered this window for some printing. And so the window's still there, it's great. Clyde Brown is actually the, I believe, the great-grandfather of Jackson Brown, the musician, and Jackson Brown's brother still lives in the Abbey, in this amazing place. Judson also did what we know as opalescent glass, or pretty common to what we associate with the American art glass movement, because the opalescent glass was very much an American invention and very popular at the time. So in the early 1900s, you have Tiffany and Lafarge and a number of Lamb Studios, a number of studios in back east working with opalescent glass. And so Judson did some of that. I think this is a really interesting use of the glass. It's very delicate, but very kind of effective. And they painted on the glass, which generally, when you use opalescent glass, most people did not paint on it. But you see the little shadows on the water of the mountains kind of as you come forward, and I think it's really effective. Another one of those landscapes that are in the mausoleum. Also during that time, the Natural History Museum, my great-grandfather did this dome, and it's I think about 28 feet across in diameter. And my brother restored this window, actually, this dome, was leading the restoration of it in the early 2000s. And then we later did refurbishment in 2009 when they redid the whole dome. The Mac Construction restored that whole area. Jetson also did the globe that you see the three muses there holding, which was done by Wachtel, who was the wife of a very famous plein air painter at that time as well. It's a beautiful space. If you haven't been down there, it's worth a visit. This globe was done in the mid-20s at the LA Central Library, which is a Goodhue building. And this is a great piece. It's hanging in this amazing front courtyard with all these great murals. And you see the zodiac symbols that go around, done by Lee Laurie. And Lee Laurie, you may be familiar with the Atlas, kind of Atlas Shrugged in Rockefeller Center. It's the same artist who did this piece. He did this piece actually 10 years before the Atlas piece for Rockefeller. Now in Pasadena, if you've been to All Saints Church, I often send people to All Saints Church because there's such a diverse collection of glass. Quite a bit of it's Judson, but there's also Tiffany windows, there's a Lamb Studios window, and a Maitland Armstrong window. And this window, this is the choir loft window that was done by a man named Frederick Wilson. And Frederick Wilson was Tiffany's lead liturgical designer for a number of years, and came to Los Angeles in I think 22 or 23. And so the other two Tiffany windows are also done by Frederick Wilson. But Frederick Wilson designed those for Tiffany, and this one was designed for Judson. And we restored this in 2013. So this is kind of typical of what was going on in that, in that kind of period. Judson also did work for Frank Lloyd Wright, and this is the Hollyhock House. And my brother also led the restoration of these windows in the early 2000s as well. And it's a great spot. They've done an amazing job restoring, especially this part of the house. I know that some of the other parts of the house still have some work to do. The dining room there. Frank Lloyd Wright often worked with local studios for all of his houses, and so Jetson was, I guess, kind of the natural choice for Frank Lloyd Wright. Ennis House is a little bit more complicated in terms of who designed these windows. And again, I get into this in my book a little bit about the fact that before the windows were even designed or made, Frank Lloyd Wright designed some windows that Mrs. Ennis apparently didn't like, and so she wanted more traditional leaded windows. And so, but at one point, Frank Lloyd Wright was fired by the Ennis's, and so they were kind of left to kind of finish the house. And so while we don't know exactly who designed these windows, we know that Judson definitely made them. And so they are kind of a bit of an outlier from most of Frank Lloyd Wright's work. But it's a beautiful space and wonderful kind of views. In 2018, I guess because of our kind of reputation of working with Frank Lloyd Wright windows and being able to restore them, we were asked to put a bid in on the Unity Temple in Oak Park. And we won that bid. And so we went and actually removed all of the windows and brought them all back to Los Angeles. They were completely re-caned with zinc as opposed to lead. Generally, windows are lead. Frank Lloyd Wright used to like to use zinc because it was a stiffer metal. So he didn't have to use reinforcing bars, which you do with lead. And it was also very clean lines, right? So with lead, it had a tendency to kind of move and shift a little bit. Zinc was very stiff. And so because of his geometric designs, he liked the use of zinc. But these windows had gone over several repairs over the years. And so it was decided at that time to take all of the zinc out and replace it. And unfortunately, our zinc supplier went out of business. It's almost, within weeks after us signing this contract. And so we scrambled actually all over the country and the world to find zinc supplies. And luckily, a manufacturer up in Canada ended up buying all the equipment from our previous supplier, but it took them forever to move everything up to Canada and get those machines up and running so that we could get the zinc to work on this job. And you can see it's a lot of zinc that we had to track down. But the restoration of the whole building is really fantastic. We were really honored to be a part of this project, excited to kind of see this space come to life. You can see the colors went back to their original colors, and this is not the temple. This is the school next to it, but great project to be involved with. We also worked on Wilshire Boulevard Temple, and these are not originally Judson windows. This came out of a firm in, I believe, Pittsburgh, we completely restored these windows in 2017 or 2018, I believe. And you can see the murals and all the artwork. A lot of the congregants of this temple were involved with the set designs and sets of the Hollywood studios. And so they put all of their great people to work to design these, design that temple. And the restoration is really spectacular. It's great to see that come back to life. During the Depression, there was a lack of work, and so the Inglewood, I'll take you back to Inglewood. This is the Golden West Mausoleum before we're in the Inglewood Mausoleum, and the Golden West has probably some of the most Judson glass out of any facility, any structure in Southern California. And you can see all the skylights. There's just hundreds of square feet of glass, and at the end of each hallways are these scenes of California landscapes. So there you see El Capitan from Yosemite. And so that's, again, just a beautiful series of windows. Also during the Depression, this is a kind of a public works. This is the library, the memorial branch. This is a World War I memorial window that recognized the students who were at the high school, which was part of this campus at that time. The windows were made for the fallen soldiers from the school from World War I. Now, after the war, the war basically shut the place down nearly. There was only 3 employees during World War II at Judson Studios. My grandfather actually went to work at Lockheed Martin and worked on fighter jets, parts for fighter jets, and then came back in the 50s. And so this was typical of the windows that you were seeing in the 1950s. This is St. James Episcopal Church. This is also a Bertram Goodhue building, like the LA Central Library. And these windows went in, what happened was a lot of the churches were building in the 19 teens, late teens or 20s. And then when the Depression hit, they basically lost any kind of hope for fundraising for the windows. And so, the Depression hits, they go into the war, and so the windows are delayed for decades until these projects start coming in. And so the neo-Gothic kind of resurgence that we see after the war is partly due to the architecture that was being built in the 20s in Los Angeles, and also a lot of the GIs were coming home from Europe and having seen these very traditional kind of things in Europe. I think this was kind of to their tastes. That being said, there was a lot of military development. So in 1960, this building was built, really fantastic building. One of my grandfathers, this is what it looks like at night. And this is one of my grandfather's favorite projects. And it's still there. We're actually starting the restoration of this, of all these windows. They're gonna do a complete restoration of this whole building. It will be encased in a massive tarp, basically, that will cover the entire structure. I think it's almost 150 feet tall. And all of these windows will be coming out. I believe there's almost 2,300 panels of glass and over 23,000 pieces of glass. And so we'll be cleaning these panels. Minor restoration, there's not a lot of restoration on the glass. It's really getting it out so they can do a lot of the restoration on the metal work, but we will take the opportunity to clean these and fix any damage that exists. So we're really excited to start in. That'll be probably a 4-year project to be working on that chapel. And then the 1970s, I love to show this shot of the 1970s. My father made this dome. This was probably the largest barrel dome, vault barrel dome in the world at the time. It's probably 80 feet long by about, I don't know, maybe 30 feet wide. And it has these kind of these nymphs coming out of shells at the very back end of there that you see. And you see down the center all of the cameras that are set in between, and it's completely suspended. So during that time in Nevada, they were nuclear testing. And so they get the casinos would get the occasional jolt. And so that whole dome had to be engineered to be able to shift and move with the jolts they were getting in their structures. And when I started really getting involved with the studio, this is 1986. This is my father's project for Mary Queen of the Universe Shrine in Orlando, Florida. And this is probably about a 10 by 14 foot window, and there's probably a dozen to 14 of these. And this is really when I started getting involved with the studio. And I actually cut glass on this window when I was in high school. This is when I started getting involved with the studio in high school. I started cutting glass, and this is one of the kind of early windows that I would have been involved with. And it's still fairly traditional. So you see kind of the very figurative, very painted, a little bit of a nice transition of color in the background. So it has a little bit of a contemporary aspect to it. But at that same time, this is what's happening in Germany, right? And so this is the kind of thing that was catching my eye, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. No figures, very geometric, but very kind of sophisticated and interesting use of color. And even today, or more recently, this is 2013. Guy Kemper's an American. He does a lot of public artwork, and he goes to Germany to do all of his work. And so, to me, this felt like, wow, why are all these Americans going to Germany to do their work? And a lot of it is just because the flash glass that I was describing before. There you see the blue on clear, where the acid kind of removes the blue to give these kind of beautiful textures. And so combining that traditional these kind of techniques with the enamel painting and the different things that they did, they were very kind of ahead, I think, technically, than most American studios. And a lot of American studios, including ours, were doing work like this. And so you have this very contemporary kind of German projects going on, and here we are, 2012, doing this kind of work. And I just found it ironic that in California, which is the cutting edge and kind of the leader in terms of design, we are finding commissions that are very traditional. And so part of that is because of our reputation, but also because there's a demand for this on the West Coast, which is kind of the irony. I think is very ironic. But I worked with Tim. Tim Carey designed and painted this window, and I worked very closely with Tim to really hone our painting techniques and create beautiful figurative windows. Because I felt like if we could master this, we could then kind of move into whatever we wanted to after that. And it was also work like that that led us to this project. And this is down at USC. This is the new Catholic Center that went in 2012. And we were able to put together all of these windows. They're probably about 13 feet wide by about 26 feet tall, maybe a little taller. And by investing in the computer, like I mentioned earlier, of us working on the computer, this was the project that pushed us into the computer realm, because we had to make these windows very quickly. And so we put together all of the figures that you see there. We put them together in digital photographs, and we had our own kind of dressing room up in a gallery in the studio, and we had people robed, and we'd gone to the Hollywood studios that do these kind of one-year sales, like a big yard sale, bought all these old costumes, and put all of the figures in position, and then put them into place to photograph, and then drop them into our composites on the computer to create the designs for these windows. So moving into the computer was really important. And then we were also able to work with a collaborative effort. So this is one window we made with Gail Roski, who's a watercolorist artist, and she designed this window as a watercolor, and then we took it over and made a stained glass window out of it. And all of the flowers are fused, and I'll get into the fusing in a minute, but this was kind of one of our early examples of fusing in the traditional style. We also work with Ruth Weisberg on some windows there, and a couple of other artists. So here you see Tim working. I want to kind of describe a little bit of the technical side of that, of drawing in the computer, kind of this conceptual drawing, and then we could use those drawings to pose our models, and then drop those photographs on these drawings, and then draw on top of those photographs to get the effects we want. And what that did is that sped up our process dramatically. And it also allowed us to print out our what we call a full-size cartoon, which you see on the wall there. And that black and white drawing would have done traditionally by hand and taken several hours to do. We were now able to print that out on the printer that I showed you on our tour earlier, and spend more of our time painting on the glass, right? Which is the most expensive, time-consuming part of the process. But we really wanted to create as much value in the end product that people were able to use, as opposed to making these beautiful black and white drawings that would then just get rolled up and thrown into our archives. And so the painting kind of really allowed us to create these beautiful effects. And there you see the finished panel. You can see every single piece on there was painted. And that really kind of pushed us into another realm, technically, as a studio. Okay. So now part two of this talk is about a phone call we received at the studio one day. It was around Christmas. I think we were actually having a Christmas party. And my artist, Tim, answered the phone passing by, and it was an architect who asked him, how big can you make a stained glass window? Oh, that's a very good question. We always like those kind of questions. How big can we make a window? And so we, kind of started talking about this to this architect about what they were looking for. And the project that they had was this. This is the Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. And this was the conceptual drawings that the architect gave us. So it was a very contemporary space, but they wanted this massive stained glass window. So you see that kind of just a placeholder of these traditional windows thrown in there. That space was 100 feet wide by 40 feet tall. And so we had never obviously dealt with anything like that. There's very, very few windows. If anything, we couldn't think of a window that was this large. And so we got to work on trying to come up with a concept. They had asked studios and artists from all over the world to make a submission, and interestingly enough, it came down to these two people. So it was Tim Carey and Jetson Studios, and the other finalist was Scott Parsons with Derek's. And so we thought, wow, this is really, the committee must be split. If you have some people on the committee that want something very contemporary that you see on the left, and ourselves a very traditional kind of approach on the right. And so the design we came up with was this. And we only had a couple weeks to design this. And the pastor had given us a narrative of he wanted a garden theme. So on the left, you see the Garden of Eden. In the center, the Resurrection Garden. And on the right is the Garden of Revelation. And being the Church of the Resurrection, the resurrected Christ was to be the main figure. So we pushed this as much as we could in terms of creating realistic figures, but also making it very fluid and very kind of contemporary in the sense of the feel. I mean, we designed this not really knowing how to make it. And after a number of revisions with the owner, this is where we ended up. And so the whole Old Testament on the left side, the life of Christ in the center, and the New Testament on the right-hand side was where it is up. And we had to tell the pastor, okay, no more figures. You've got enough figures in this window. But basically, so we started dropping it in, getting their approval on it. And this is to give you a size, an idea of the size of the window. That's the size of a school bus next to how big this window was. And so we were really getting ourselves into something here that we, again, did not know exactly how to make. And so, so we started looking around, and Tim and I kind of trying different things. We started playing around in the studio. And one day Tim was flipping through a glass art magazine and found that the person that made this window was giving a class, Narcissus Quagliata. And Narcissus is kind of a maverick in the stained glass industry. And he made this dome. This is actually a dome in a subway in Taiwan. And it's 7,000 square feet. So the window we were making was about half that size. So we knew, wow, okay, he can do contemporary work. He works with the figure, and he's worked on a massive scale. And so we said, this is the guy we gotta get to help us. So Tim went up and took a class with Narcissus. They hit it off, and so then it was a matter of convincing Narcissus to come and work with us. So I want to introduce you to Narcissus. This is Narcissus on the right, and here he is up at Pilchuck Glass School up in outside of Seattle. And you may know the guy he's sitting next to in the center there. That's Dale Chihuly. And so some of you may be familiar with Dale Chihuly and Chihuly's work of blowing glass. And so Narcissus taught quite a bit with Dale Chihuly up in Pilchuck. And Pilchuck was was founded by Dale Chihuly as a glass blowing facility. Narcissus was not a glass blower. He was a stained glass person. And so, but there was still a demand for stained glass classes. And so Dale Chihuly relied kind of, through the 80s primarily on Narcissus to teach stained glass. And here you see, this is a great early shot of Dale Chihuly. And so you see on the bottom right there in the corner, you see the glass that he's rolling, right? So if you know glass blowers, they work with blowpipes, right? And they're blowing glass into three-dimensional shapes. And this is an early work of Dale Chihuly's. So as a stained glass artist, Narcissus was exposed to all of this, technical kind of ability and things that were going on. But this is the type of work that he was doing. And so he was working in two-dimensional projects as opposed to three-dimensional. But he wanted all of the kind of flexibility that you got with combining colors in glass blowing. I mean, he loved these kind of just explosions of color and transitions of color that were very hard to get with just out of a sheet of glass. And so what he did is he convinced the glass blowers at Pilchuck to make rondelles for him. So you see the rondelles on the left-hand side, those blue, red, yellow. Those are glass rondelles that are actually blown and spun to create a flat surface. And so he started designing these rondelles, and the glass blowers were blowing them flat for him to then use. So you see on the right-hand side, if you know anything about glass blowing, that's what they call a marver table. And on the marver table, you can put down colored glass and take the hot glass that's on the end of a blowpipe and roll it onto that. See, that it's kind of picked up those pieces of glass. And here it is in a molten form. And as that gathers, it's what you call a gather of glass, you can blow it into and spin it into this rondelle, which is what you see there. And so you see he has all these rondelles on the left, started incorporating some of the rondelles into his leaded panels, which you see on the right-hand side. But what he was really interested in was getting into the bits of glass that he had these amazing transitions of color. And so he was taking these rondelles and cutting them up and integrating them into his flat glass and into his leaded work. And so he could get these just amazing, transitions of color. It almost looks like a watercolor, right? There's almost this amazing combination. But the problem he was running into was putting it together. So you see all that lead work. And if you look closely at all the curvy lines of it, that's if you know anything about stained glass, you've got to put a stained glass panel together. That's a nightmare. And so it was almost impossible to be able to continue on and be able to make a little bit of money making panels like this. So he started experimenting with glass and ended up at a place called Bullseye in Portland, Oregon. And Portland's where I introduced warm glass. So Pilchuck is hot glass. So when you're blowing and you're working out of an oven that is probably 1600 degrees, you got molten glass, that's hot glass. Warm glass is when you're working in a kiln, and it's generally firing probably closer to 1400 degrees, 1300 degrees, something like that. But you're all able to work in a two-dimensional aspect. And so very early on, Narcissus was going to Bullseye and working with them to take their glass, put it on a flat sheet of glass, heat it up, and then manipulate it. And so there you see him sticking it into the kiln on the left-hand side there. There it's red hot. He's got this steel pole where he's able to kind of scratch into the glass while it's still kind of molten and moving around. And you can see kind of the earliest effects. So that's 1993. And this is a head that he did. You can see the shoulders on the bottom there going up into this kind of abstracted head. He went back down to the Bay Area where he was living at the time, working with a guy named David Ruth. And they were in the kiln, actually working with the glass directly in the kilns. At that time, you see how hot the glass is there, and they're manipulating it. And that's where his head kind of went next, or the heads that he was making, not his own head. Really beautiful. So this kind of beautiful movement of glass that he was creating in these panels. And then, taking that and making it almost to an architectural level, right? So this is now kind of this is what's Gateway to Night, which is really an important piece because it was kind of proved that fusing glass was possible on a large scale. And what we loved about it too was his use of the figure. And so he continued to experiment with these ideas and then started introducing painting into his figures. And so by using traditional paints and fused glass, he was able to create these a collection of figures. And that really excited us because we knew we had to kind of work figures into our traditional narrative scene for Kansas, but also make it very fluid and contemporary. And so this was a great solution. So Tim went up and started working with Narcissus at a class in Denver. This was actually in Denver. And we convinced Narcissus to come down and work at Judson. And so he kind of took in the design and we started experimenting immediately. And so here you see the glass on a sheet of glass, and he's got frit on there. And I'll get into a little bit of the technical stuff in a little bit. But I want to kind of show you that it had promise, right? And so we went up to Bullseye ourselves, talked to Dan Schroer and the folks up at Bullseye. This is actually in their factory. Dan's the owner of Bullseye Glass and one of the original founders. They kind of gave us their full support to help us be able to manipulate the glass. And so this was the very first panel that we did. And this panel was done as a kind of a fundraiser as well. So the pastor at the church could raise some money. And what we loved was, what we could do with the figures. And so here it is, all these kind of, introduce all these colors of glass and then combine all the traditional painting that we had kind of gotten so skilled at using and combining these two worlds. And that really gave us some really exciting opportunities. The problem was we were in a National Register historic building with a 200 amp electric box. And when you want to fuse glass, you have to have a lot of electrical power. And we had very little time. I had a deadline, right, to work on this window going to Kansas. And so I very quickly realized that we had to expand to a different space if we were going to do that. And that's where we found this building. And this building, like I said, is you've now walked through it briefly on a video tour. And on the left-hand side, there's a wall of glass that we, drove by almost every day, getting to the original studio. We thought, wow, that's like a big easel we could use. And there's not many buildings around that have a wall of glass like that. And then we convinced Bullseye to open up one of their resource centers on the right-hand side. So you see the brick over there on the right. We convinced Bullseye to move in next door. And so now we're kind of trying to build this kind of community of glass. And it's a very, very exciting time for us. But anyway, to get back to our story quickly, here's Tim and Narcissus. So we got the facility, we got the kilns, we committed to the fusing, and so they got to work. And so what they're doing now is what we call fritting. That's a photo of them fritting onto the colored glass. And frit is basically ground up glass, right? So it's different sizes of frit. Bullseye makes 4 different sizes of frit, from powder to a small gravel. And this glass is, what's unique about it is the fact that this glass can be fused together in a kiln, right? So if we look at the traditional glass, that flash glass, for example, that I was telling you, if you took 2 different colors and you put them in a kiln and fused them together, they would break over time because they're not compatible. So it's the mineral oxides of the colors in the glass that create the color. And those have different points of expansion. And so when the temperature changes or things shift, they stress each other out and break. But Bullseye created a glass that was all compatible. So all of the colors are compatible to combine together in a kiln and fuse together. So I want to kind of just walk you through quickly a little bit, give you an example. So here's another line. I want to kind of show you the line we did for Kansas versus the line we did for USC at the Catholic Center. And so if you look at those two, you see on the line on the right, very traditional painted, and on the left, we're able to use some of that traditional paint. So here we are painting on a clear sheet of glass, which is a Bullseye glass. We can paint in the detail, and then we cut up colors of Bullseye glass that's laid on top of that, and then frit on top of that. So this combination of sheet glass and frit glass on the clear glass allowed us to create these amazing transitions with the painting. And so here you see like the detail that we were able to get in the lion's head that just kind of opened up a whole new world to us, and we were really kind of excited about it. One of the other things we learned about, and Narcissus actually learned, Narcissus was in charge of this area of the window of creating this galaxy. And so what we found is that if you laid the frit down in the kiln, you could create almost like these brush strokes of color. And so you see there working from the drawing, getting a sense of what we're trying to assemble together, laying that out on a light table, and basically constructing it, taking those what we ended up calling lace glass. So putting down the frit created these amazing effects of glass that then we could combine with the painting as well to create just this kind of symphony of color, right? I mean, it's just amazing the combinations we were able to put together. And we were able to use some of this pre-made, we call that a pre-made process. These pre-mades could be used to make certain areas of the window. And some of the flowers are some of my favorite. Of course, it's Kansas, so we have the sunflowers in there as well. And lastly, the last kind of technical thing was the head of Christ. And so the head of Christ is probably, I think, the most important panel of this whole window. And so what we did is we took all of those things that I just mentioned to you and combined them together. So Tim painted on the clear surface. We had made these pre-made combinations of color. So you see that purple and pink piece in the front there, kind of the amber that has a little bit of a fade to it. So we were able to create highlights for the figure and also these shadows, and then assemble it almost like a mosaic. So here you see all of these pieces that are stacked on top of each other, on top of the painted clear glass that was then thrown into the kiln, and we got this. And it's really spectacular. And I think personally, this is probably one of the most important pieces of glass that's been made in the recent past. And really exciting to see. And so we were able to continue through 161 panels we made in less than about 2.5 years, and installed it, and so the church is happy. So that really kind of leads us to kind of the final kind of section of my talk here. And where do we go from here? So here we've committed, and one of the reasons the book, I really wanted to look at the book about, wow, I've committed to this new facility, to a new technique. Where do we go from here? What do we do now? This project's over. The Kansas City project was over. And luckily we had this massive project to move us into a new realm. And so, so we really had to think about where we take it. One of the things is that Narcissus stayed with us. He spends 6 months out of the year in our studio working with our employees and doing his own work. And this is actually a dome that he did for a residence down in Newport Beach. And the first fully fused dome that he's ever made. So while he's worked with fused glass, as you saw from the early 90s, this is the first time that he took on a project and completely fused it. And we really kind of pushed the envelope on this, and it's a pretty spectacular piece. The other thing we did, something that was dear to my heart, was to work with artists. And so some of the first artists that were really interested in stained glass were muralists, street artists. David Flores has a really famous mural down at Dodger Stadium. This is called the Street Painter, actually. So he's kind of done a play there. So all that top layer, that's one piece of glass that goes all the way around the head of the muralist. And that was completely fused. And then he liked the traditional leads around the eyes and the face. And that piece actually went up to a gallery up in Santa Barbara. The other thing is that I went out and I started looking for artists that really wanted to work in stained glass. And so this is Amir Fala. He works actually in Highland Park, literally blocks from the studio. And his work is really colorful and powerful. And so we were able to take a piece like this. This is a self-portrait. He's Iranian, and so he kind of does this kind of concept on kind of immigrants and these stories of people that their life stories. And this is a self-portrait of him holding a sock monkey. But look at that glass turns into that. So literally hundreds of pieces of glass fired together to create this beautiful texture. And then we could go in. Here's Amir did some of the painting on it, but combining that with traditional painting. And you even see the little, what we call little frit balls that were clear pieces fired into a ball that was laid on top of the sock monkey to give it texture. So if you ran your fingers across it, you would feel the bumps of it. And this he showed in his gallery in West Hollywood and sold it immediately. And so that was very exciting. And we continue to work with him today. This was a second piece he did that went to a gallery in New York. And we're now working with him on a public art project in the Sunset area. And public art was another, now that's a new kind of direction we're headed. We're working with, this is Michael Davis, who's a fairly well-known public artist. And he did this piece. This was a box down in a residential area in Orange County, Huntington Beach. And at night, it's really beautiful. It's this kind of shock of color. Anne Elizabeth's piece, she came in and worked with, Tim Carey worked with us on these panels as well for a firehouse in Santa Clarita. And this is a beautiful burning tree. It's funny how firefighters love fire. So they love to go to fire. And then we actually just a couple of weeks ago installed these windows. So we have kind of the fire drop, the burning tree, and on the right-hand side, you see the firefighter. And this is a brand new fire station in Santa Clarita. We also work with the artist Sarah Kane, who did a project at San Francisco Airport. This is a new terminal. This is actually, I believe it's a Hyatt hotel check-in area. It's a 150-foot wall of glass by 10 feet. And she did this just amazing shock of color. She's an abstract painter. And so she started doing primarily just kind of big pieces of glass, and then got into the fusing. You see that piece that's kind of red, yellow into the blue, that's actually fused panels. And so she realized she could do these kind of amazing transitions of color. And James Jean is kind of an illustrator and artist in his own right. He's very prolific, very amazing, kind of fantastical images that he does. This was a series that we did with him that was sent to Japan, actually, and showed in Murakami's gallery, and was very exciting. We were very excited to be able to show these in Japan. And he loved it so much that he did this three-dimensional piece, and we had talked about maybe pushing the limits a little bit with stained glass and seeing what we could do. And so we came up with this piece that he calls Gaia that is about 8 feet tall and about 4 feet wide, maybe a little wider than that in its widest point. And it's three-dimensional. And when it's laid out flat, that's what it looks like. And this glass is really interesting. With fusing, we can actually water jet cut it and get these very kind of precise lines, which you see in the background there. And so we're able to really push the limits of what we can do with the glass. And again, he's so happy with that. He kind of is now we're in the conceptual stages of this project. We're still looking for a home for this, but we're starting the production of it right now. And so it's going to be actually about 14 feet by about 18 feet high, and you're going to be able to walk into it. And at night, it'll be lighted from the interior, and it'll be like a beacon. You'd be able to, if placed right, we'll be able to see it from miles away. And so we're very excited about this project, and hope to see it produced by next year. So kind of wrapping up, one of the most important things was to be able to train our team into working with fused glass, right? This is such a new technique on a studio level. Like, no one's really worked in fused glass on a studio architectural level. And so what's so exciting about us is that as an old historic studio, to be able to kind of bring a new technique into the repertoire and really kind of support it and push it through, we're feeling like this has a lot of potential. The thing about fusing is that, I described it as fusing is a very easy thing to do, but it's a very hard thing to do well. And so Narcissus and I came up with a plan to really kind of have a project where we could have each of our artisans work on a panel that was unique to them, very different stylistically. And so we separated them out. We went over all of these drawings, and basically what I did is I went to my friend Peter Adams at the California Art Club. If you know the plein air group, the California Art Club, and Peter Adams, the president of it, said, Peter, we want to interpret some paintings into glass. Can you help us out? And so he was the first one to offer up a painting. And so we were able to take his painting, and we had Matt and Quentin. You see Matt there and Quentin working with some of these techniques that we've really been developing in the studio of combining pre-made materials, traditional painting with the frit and sheet glass to interpret that painting into a work of art in glass. Carl Dempwolf piece. Reed was in charge of that. There you see a lot of the pre-mades that are already on the table mixed in with frit. You see pouring frit. And again, stylistically, very different techniques. So they were all working independently, but all working together to interpret these paintings into glass. And the amazing thing is that you see that painting is only 11 by 9 inches, but we were blowing them up to about, they were about 5 by 6 feet. And these didn't make it in the book, unfortunately. So you're getting a little highlight of these. And you saw these in the walking tour. This is Robin Purcell's piece. Again, a little bit different approach with what we call the lace glass and the pre-made material mixed in, and we were able to create this almost like an abstract painting there. And here they are in the afternoon with the afternoon light shining through them. So we're very excited about these. And these are going in with those windows that I showed you earlier at the Inglewood Mausoleum. And so it's kind of fun to have these traditional windows that are a little over 100 years old, done by Judson Studios, mixed in with the fused panels that we're working on. So I think we have a very bright future, and I'm very excited about where we're going. And you know, for me, and a lot of my research, and again, I go into a little bit in this in the book, is thinking about all of these major artists that worked in glass through their career. And I think about, had they had the opportunity to fuse with glass, what if they would have, what they would have been able to do. And so, you know, one of my passions is to reach out to artists and work with them in glass and expose them to glass, and to really get a sense of working in a medium that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. And one person I've been trying to convince was this guy, David Hockney, who did the Queen's window at Westminster Abbey. And he worked with Helen Whitaker in England, in York. And he designed this window on his iPad, and worked with Helen, who's become a friend of mine and a colleague. And our families come from the same town in England. And as much as I love this window, I think about what Hockney could do in fusing. You know, and you know, if you think about Hockney's paintings and the transitions and kind of explosions of color that he has, if he could fuse and be adapted to fuse, how exciting that would be, you know. And so going back to like the beginning of my talk and thinking of preconceived notions and you know, thinking of what stained glass, I think even an artist like David Hockney has some kind of sense of what stained glass should be. And I suppose you kind of take a conservative approach too when you're doing a window for the Queen of England. But you know, I think this is a great sign to have a very important contemporary artist be able to make and work in stained glass. But I compare that to Narcissus' window that he did for the Grace Cathedral back in 2001, and think about this window in a cathedral in California versus you know, the window that went in at Westminster Abbey. And I think this is really capturing kind of the California spirit and what I think glass has moving forward. So, you know, I want to thank you all. That's kind of it for my talk. I invite you all, just a quick plug here for those of you, you know, in Glendale, the Forest Lawn Museum. We had this scheduled earlier in the year. It was postponed. It will be opening in August, on August 14th, and we will have a James Fishburne, the curator there at the museum, has done an amazing job over the last couple of years of collecting pieces from Judson's archives, as well as some of the contemporary pieces. You'll also be able to see the collection, some pieces from the collection of Forest Lawn, their museum. They have a very important collection of stained glass from the medieval period up to the 20th century. And so that is going to be opening on August 4th, and it's worth a visit. I really highly encourage you to go and visit there. So thank you all very much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you spending the time to hear me out. I hope you get a chance to purchase our new book. It's 4 years of my life, 120 years of glass. And I do hope that you're able to find a copy. Once Upon a Time has them in Glendale, and I appreciate with Once Upon a Time to stocking their shelves with the book. Thank you very much to Glendale Historical Society and to Pasadena Heritage. I grew up in Glendale. I spent a lot of time as a kid on my bike around Once Upon a Time. So Glendale's a very special place in my heart. I was on Pasadena Heritage's board and have a very strong respect for people who preserve buildings. So thank you very much. And thank you very much, Angel City Press, for publishing my book. And I hope you have some questions for me.
Yeah, we got a couple questions. A lot of people just sending some stuff in right now. A lot of thank yous. Thank you guys for watching. I had a couple here that I thought would be interesting. Somebody asked, how far back, Alan Merson asked, how far back in history did stained glass first begin? anywhere in the world, and how has it changed or remained the same over the years regarding the process? So I know it's a huge question, but maybe
Yeah,
we can just target where it started and then how it got to Europe.
right. Well, I think stained glass, I mean, kind of stained glass as we know it is started in about the 11th century. And so, and there's still some existing stained glass in Germany from the 11th century. And, you know, nothing really changed drastically other than maybe kind of the process of how the glass was made. Um, Silver stain was introduced, I believe, in I believe it was the 14th century. And silver stain was just a silver nitrate that would be applied to glass and create a gold color. And you know, but I always joked that the latest invention in stained glass was the glass cutter, and that was almost 500 years ago. And so, glass in itself has really kind of maintained a long tradition of staying the same, and I think that's part of the beauty of it. And you know, what I think that I'm trying to illustrate tonight was how fused glass can really change stained glass in itself. And so, you know, we didn't invent fused glass. You know, we're not the first people to use fused glass, but I think we're the first major stained glass studio to really embrace fused glass and kind of tap into its potential. And so, you know, when you think about it, that's just from the 1990s. And so, and it's a very American and I think West Coast kind of shift that will really change how we design and create stained glass moving forward.
Cool. We have another question from Julie Larson, who asked, you're refurbishing the stained glass at LCPC Church in La Crescenta. What exactly does that entail? So I know we've had our guys on site for the past week or 2 weeks now.
Yes.
Doing a lot of work on that project.
Yeah, so the La Crescenta Church is that they're doing a full restoration. So all of those windows will be removed. So we actually last week installed the first phase back of the restored windows. And then this week, our guys are there today and will be there tomorrow removing windows on the other side of the church. And so all of those windows come out. In this particular instance, we're doing what we call a refurbishment. And so I distinguish a full restoration from refurbishing. And so full restoration is when you completely remove all of the leads from a panel. You clean the glass, and then you basically, you do any kind of repairs and you re-lead the window back together. What La Crescenta is doing is a refurbishment where we're taking the windows out. We're replacing the perimeter lead, which generally has some aging due to sealants that are in the frame, cleaning them up, doing miscellaneous repairs to broken pieces and that kind of thing, and then reinstalling them. So that's kind of a difference. And so generally stained glass needs a full restoration about every 100 years. Refurbishment is generally kind of in the 50 to 70 year range. Which will buy you probably another 70 years or so. And so it really kind of depends on the condition of the windows, their age, their design, that drives that decision.
I think we probably, I mean, we're over time already, but maybe we can just do 1 or 2 more questions. I had a little back and forth with somebody who was asking about Spanish Revival work that we've done for houses like that around Los Angeles. And they asked if the Spanish Revival stained glass is an extension of the arts and crafts movement or a separate discipline.
You know, that's a very good question, just simply because of the architecture here in Los Angeles. And the revival, you know, there was generally what you saw was kind of a massive window in the front of the house that opened up into the living space. And it was generally kind of simple rectangles with a kind of romantic, so to speak, scene of a Spanish theme or a Hispanic theme or, you know, some kind of medieval theme even sometimes. And I do relate that to the arts and crafts movement because it is a very similar outgrowth of it in the sense that a lot of the scenes and the subject matter were incorporated from this traditional figurative, colorful, hand-painted techniques along with kind of the palette, I think is very similar. But what happened with the Spanish Revival is that they kind of were much more airy and a lot more clear glass and a lot more light to be shed in, to be let in. That's not necessarily saying that there were kind of smaller windows that had these kind of themes in them, but I relate them to kind of a California arts and crafts version of that.
Cool. And one more softball for the last question. Which buildings, Ellen asked, which buildings in Los Angeles area have your favorite pieces of Judson glass? She says my personal favorite is the Rotunda at the LA Central Library, which I think I might agree with her.
Yeah. Well, that's hard to say. I mean, I think tonight I showed a lot of my favorites. The library was kind of a surprise for me. So I think that was kind of, when I was doing the book, was kind of one of my biggest surprises, because I didn't know that we had done that piece. And so that has kind of a special significance now for me. The Rotunda at the Natural History Museum is, again, another hidden gem that I think most people in LA have not seen and don't realize, like, that was the Fine Arts building at the time when it was built. And so that Rotunda, where people would have gathered for art openings and social events that were really for the fine arts community during that time, is kind of exciting to think about. So those are kind of two of my favorites, and of course a number of churches that are pretty exciting too. So yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Well, do you want to wrap us up here?
No, again, thank you so much, everybody. We do hope to, please stay informed with us on our website. You can follow us on Instagram and our social media if you want to kind of see what we're up to. Kyle does a great job of keeping us up to date, and keeping our website fresh. We do have retail products if you're interested. There's a lot of retail products that are available on our website that are made kind of in our new fusing studio as well as our traditional studio. And I hope you'll stay involved with what we're doing at Jetson. We, again, are working a lot of new things, a lot of restoration, and I hope some exciting projects that you'll want to see in the near future. So, we've stopped tours recently because of the COVID situation, so we're not doing tours in the near future, but we will open up eventually again, so that you can hopefully come visit us, and so buy a book and enjoy it. There's some great treasures. It's not only a history of Judson Studios, but a history of the city of Los Angeles and communities like Glendale and Pasadena. And thank you again for joining me tonight, and I hope to see you around town.